Yo guys, what is up? And we are back with more Broadway grosses. So let's get into it. This week was a pretty interesting week, but not in a good way. So let's get into it. And Juliet did 99% last week and 87% this week, going from 1,137,472 to 875K for a 262K drop. Pretty significant drop and really horrible. Now again, Aunt Juliet is still doing great. It's still doing phenomenal. It's not going anywhere. But normally you don't. Well, I guess you start seeing it now. But Aunt Juliet has had a weird trajectory where, even back in the fall, it would go to 800,000, and I'm wondering if this is a new trend that we're seeing with more big brand jukebox musicals, where they start to do numbers that you'd expect in their second or third year, starting now. It's still making a ton of money. It's still gonna be on Broadway for many more years, but it is definitely a very interesting development that does continue on in the next few shows that we're gonna go over. But again, it's not in any trouble. It's doing fine. And Juliet's lowest, I'd say, point that it could do is 850,000, so it's right on that mark. Although preferably, Aunt Juliet does not go past, probably 900,000, because there's royalties, and, well, the production is not super, expensive, I don't know, a Moulin Rouge is. They have to pay the artists who they are allowing use their music money. A Beautiful Noise, which is closing in June, did 55% this week compared to last week's 67%, and 709K to 592K. Absolutely horrendous numbers. I don't know why they're waiting until June. I mean, when you think about it, it did do pretty solid up until January of 2024. I mean, the grosses were inconsistent, but it did very well in the fall, so it does have a lot of money in its, in its bank. But do you really want to lose money? Personally, I would have closed it this month at the end of March and just gone out with a bang. Back to the Future did 79% this week, its lowest capacity week, compared to last week's 96%, and 1,090,800 last week to this week's 802,722, which is its worst week yet. And I think Back to the Future, I think, needs to make 900-something thousand, so it's way past its gross potential. And again, this is another interesting case where these are the kind of numbers you'd expect Back to the Future to eventually do in its second, third year, not in its first year. Normally, it would not go past the $1 million mark, and certainly not past the $950,000 mark in its first year being on Broadway. And I do wonder, is this season so oversaturated? Statistically, this is the largest the largest season of new musicals coming in. I know it is, the beginning of March, so, it's, people were on February break last week, but to have this kind of significant drop is concerning. This was an almost $300,000 drop, and it really makes you wonder, is this the new normal? Is this what the next thing to expect, is that these bigger brand musicals that are new do have these kind of huge falls, which is not the normal in past years. So for me, it's I'm very intrigued and interested in, this is not something that we're used to. So let me know what do you think in the comments down below. Days of Wine and Roses continues to not do good with 364,000 this week compared to last week's 406,000, and 54% compared to last week's 60%. And again, it's a very depressing musical, so it makes sense why it's not doing so great. I also think that a show like this opening in January and February was a bad idea, and I know that they did that only because Kelly O'Hara is filming a TV show, and she has to do that at the beginning of May. But I think for a musical like this, you kind of want to get it as close to the Tony Awards as you can. And a lot of people might argue, well, bands visit Dear Evan Hansen, the prom, not the prom, but the band's visit came on way before the Tony season was even begun, but that was pre-COVID. And then we're in post-COVID, and post-COVID Broadway is very different from pre-COVID. Hadestown continues to sell out with 1,022,163 compared to last week's 1,036,690, which is incredible. It has had a huge comeback, and if it continues to maintain these numbers for a few months, it will make it to 2025. And I don't want it to leave. And clearly this stunt casting is working, but the thing about stunt casting is eventually You run out of stunt casting people. You run out of stars, and that's when we'll see, will Hadestown survive enough? And I don't know if it will, but for right now, it's doing a-okay. Hamilton had its worst week in a long time, going from 100% to 94%, and 1,876,354 to 1,548,186. Harry Potter had its worst week in a long time. I don't cover it a lot, but it is necessary because it did do that bad. It went from 96% to 82%, and 1,298,672 to 951,496. Again, Harry Potter isn't going anywhere, but it always has been the show that's always underperformed. You know, I feel like it's never perform to its potential. You know, it should be making 1,500,000, 600 consistently, and it just doesn't do that. Even in its first year, it didn't do amazing. I mean, it did amazing, but it didn't do what you would think it would. Akimbo, and that's closing in April, did 79% compared to last week's 90%, and 509K to 466K. Merrily did 100% and had its weakest week yet, going from 1,566,346 to 1,478,927, but still doing phenomenal. But it had an average ticket of $191, which is now getting into like normal ticket prices. Moulin Rouge did 99% last week and 98% this week, going from 1,350,210 to 1,214,153. So actually had a decent drop, not that bad of a drop. Six went from $1 million to 811K, and 99% to 94%. Spamalot had its worst week yet, going from 71% to 59%, and 693K to 589K. I do not think this will be extending past July, and it seems like shows like Spamalot do very bad, but almost detrimentally bad, in January, February, the fall. And it is a limited engagement if you look on the website, even though they're not advertising it as such. Now, they have made a lot of money, so they can take these hits, but it's still not good, and it's still like, this is like one of the worst performing shows this week, and the capacity is really bad. And again, Spamalot doesn't need to make $900,000 or even $800,000. Probably around $800,000 a week, and it can survive at $750,000, $700,000. But once you get past $700,000 or even $750,000, is when you're like, this isn't acceptable. Because while it's not a very expensive production with all the LED screens, and my review for that will be coming probably next week or maybe later this week, the cast is pretty big, and so you have a pretty significant cast and orchestra size, and so Spamalot cannot sustain these numbers. But again, I think this will do much better when we get into the spring. Sweeney went from 98% to 89%, and 1,424,356 to 1,199,322, which is not great, but again, it's still doing gangbuster numbers. The Notebook did 98% this week and 99% last week, going from 880K to 783K for an almost 100K drop, which is not what you want to see for a great new music, for a best new musical contender and a new musical. And it was doing $1 million, but it should continue at $1 million. So this is a bit concerning, but again, I think it's going to get good reviews. I'm pretty confident it's going to win Best Musical. Days of Wine and Roses would win, but it's going to close. And I think it will do very good over the summer and over the fall, and it will be here for many years. But it is interesting that it had this significant drop. Now, The Notebook doesn't need to make $850,000 a week. But any show that's doing under 800K, it's concerning. But I will say, compared to the other best new musicals or musicals of last season, it's doing much better. You know, people were saying, oh, Shuck's doing pretty well, or, you know, Kimberly Kimball's doing well, give it a break. And the only musical financially that did do good and did what it was expected to do was New York, New York. And obviously it fell off, but it was doing $1 million consistently and staying in that bracket of where it is. And The Notebook is a much less expensive musical, I think, than New York, New York. Although I know they do have rain effects. But I think that as long as it doesn't go past like $750,000 consistently, it will be fine. And it is going to get a lot of nominations, so it's nothing to worry about. But it is interesting. But again, the new musicals are starting to do better better business in pre-COVID level numbers than last season, which is a good sign. And then to finish it off, Waterfruit Elephants had 5 performances. It was going to have 6, but one of them got canceled for 87% compared to last week's 93%, and 344K last week to this week's 540K. It's a flop in the making. It's the next New York. Not much to say about it there. Even with 5 performances, they should have done better. The average ticket is $87, and they're, according to the Broadway Journal, their weekly operating costs, it needs to sell at least $960,000 to cover operating expenses, and this is way off of that. And I just think that this will either get Best Musical and will close like in June, or it will not get Best Musical and will close in May. But I think we're looking at a big old flop here, and it's unfortunate, but the reviews from at least the people that have seen it in previews have not been good. It's kind of been when I've been expecting it, and I'm not going to see it. But yeah, those are the grosses for this week. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.